the chair of this session and today's proceedings, Nadeep Saab, it's a great honor to be on dais with you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor. I'd like to thank all of you for coming this morning to be part of what is a very, very important conversation. And I somehow feel I'm standing here trying to take coal to Newcastle because there's people of so much wisdom, thought, and pause. I think the last being the most important thing of the three in front of me today. So I don't know how I'm going to add in any manner to what is going to be said after. But thank you very much for allowing me to share a few thoughts with you. The last 4 or 5 years of my life I've spent looking at the symbols of India, which resulted in the book I just published. So I'll start by referring to a few notes from my research and my book, and let's see how it goes. I have a line to sing for you first. Ohoraho tobo ahvano prochorito shunito bodaro bani. Ohoraho tobo ahvano prochorito shunito bodaro bani. Hindu Bauddha Shikho Jaino Poroshiko Musalmano Kristani. Hindu Bauddha Shikho Jaino Poroshiko Musalmano Kristani. Purbo Paschimo Ashe Tobo Shingashono Pashe Prema Karuno to Gatha. This is the second verse of the song Jana Gana Mana. I truly feel we missed an opportunity to have included this verse in the anthem of this country. Because it is unusual, because if you look at the time when we had independence and the republic was formed, it was just after partition. And if every child in this country was taught to sing Hindu Bauddha Shikho Jaina Parushiko Musalmano Kristani, Jana Gana Mana is not just an anthem, it's a song, it's first a song. And I truly believe we don't have a relationship with the song. We have a relationship with the idea of the anthem. But do we know the song? No, we don't. We are indoctrinated to be subservient to an anthem. But do we have an emotional bond to the song? No, we don't. And maybe if we had this one verse, where he said, this is the set of people. And calling the religions out also includes the various diversity of ethnicity, of faith, of caste, everything into this aspect or this abstract idea we call India. India is not in the borders that we have drawn. India is in an abstract concept that was created. And I think Tagore encapsulates that quite beautifully in the 5-verse song called Jana Gana Mana. So my first hope is that all of you will go back home and actually listen to the whole song and read the meaning of the song. Because song is the landscape of not just geography, it's the landscape of the people, it's the landscape of our emotional state. It is also a song of hope, where Tagore ends by saying, the sun will rise from behind the eastern hills. And I think we are gathered here because we also want the sun to rise from behind the eastern hills. Because I think we will agree that our state is a state of anxiety. It is true that I get up many mornings with that feeling at the pit of my stomach. There is a helplessness associated with that feeling. Because it's not the physical violence that only bothers us. The 06, 04, 05 draws this absolutely magnificent painting of Bharat Mata. And I want to bring that here because I don't believe she is the Bharat Mata we see around now in all these pictures that we see. Today's Bharat Mata seems like there is a lion and she seems to be ready to almost go to war sometimes. She has weaponry. But Abhinavnath's Bharat Mata is not this Bharat Mata. Please look at that picture carefully. She's an author. She's a renunciate. So the moment somebody is a renunciate, religion becomes immaterial. The renunciate exists in the state of saying, humanity is how I exist. And she has 4 hands, and in the 4 hands, she has 4 things. She doesn't have a religious symbol. What does she have? She has crop, she has prayer beads, she has sheaves of grain, and she has manuscript. Knowledge, food, faith, and shelter. Clothing and shelter. And is she angry? No. Is she sad? No. Her state is the state of peace, a renunciate state of equanimity, where these various emotional categories dissolve with a larger understanding of society and humanity. Now, unfortunately, even at that time, was used to divide. So as much as Bengal was a moment when the communities came together to fight against the division of Bengal, which Lord Curzon had done, there were still divisions happening between the Muslim community and the Hindu community. Suddenly the same Bharat Mata was being used to push these communities aside. And this is recorded by many scholars, even who saw it at that time. In fact, there is an essay by Harivansh Rai Bachchan where he talks about seeing all this. But the moment we do that, we are defining something. We are defining the notion of who belongs and who does not belong. Who is an insider, who is an outsider. Who has a right, who doesn't have a right. So the division of religion is not just a religious division. It's a division of belonging within a certain framework, which we call India. Even when the flag was being accepted in the Constituent Assembly, the Christian members in the Assembly actually speak about this idea of saying there are people who believe because this religion is not from India, within quotes. People who practice that religion are seen as outsiders. The white robe is seen as something from outside. So, this whole tension that we have created through religion, who is the first person of this land? Who has first rights on this land? Is the larger problem we have created through the divisions that are created through religion. We are now speaking about the crisis for the humanity and for Earth itself. But I really think the crisis is a crisis of fear, a crisis of hate. Because the fact of the matter is, there is fear inside. I'm an artist. So often I see things through the aesthetics of what you see or what you hear. The fact is, there is a crisis of fear in seeing people. If people see markers of somebody being Muslim or Christian or Hindu, depending on which religion they practice, there is a fear immediately. Nobody can lie to see that sensation appears in people. That somehow within, they are uncomfortable. I've heard so many taxi drivers telling me as we drive through some region, sir, this is Muslim locality. I never asked it. But I don't want to judge that person. And let's not judge him for a moment. But you know that immediate reaction, that there is danger. It's from the visibility of seeing people dressed in a certain manner or practicing in a certain manner. This is as true of people of other religions going to some other locality. If a Christian comes to a Hindu locality, they may feel that they don't belong. So even within this idea of India, there are places where we belong and we don't belong, by the way. In our own cities there are. In our own cities there are places where you say, this is part of what I am, that is not part of what I am. So this idea of India, very bluntly put, is actually a complete illusion. If even in your little 2 streets you don't belong in both streets. If you don't feel that you belong in 2 streets, what is this belonging in India? Is there something we believe because we taught and drawn a map? Because this fear is there in so many people. The question before us is how do we address this fear? Because in addressing this fear is where we can move beyond the limitations that we have all been ingrained to see. Colors, saffron, green, these colors are triggers today. White are triggers. Why? I love the color of saffron. Why am I now worried about wearing the color of saffron? Because saffron is now being used to be something that is vile. That should not happen. Saffron didn't do anything to me. It's a beautiful color. It's a color that means so many profound things that we can embrace. Green. The green in Islam is, by the way, the green for environmentalism. The whole idea of Jannat, the green is about saving this world. And it comes again and again in Islam, in the hadiths, you always hear about how the world is a green place, about conserving, about how much you must consume. It's all there. How even at the last moment, if you're dying, the first thing you do is save nature. But that's not how we see green. That's not how we see saffron. That's not how we see white. So let us address this very visceral feeling which is there in many people here. Because if you don't address that, any intellectual discussion about how we should come together is not going to happen. How are we going to address this fear? And let's not judge the people who have this fear also. For a moment. Keep extremists out. Extremists have no place in the conversation. But the normal person who has this fear, this ingrained fear, how are we going to address that fear? How are we going to change that? The other thing, I talked about sight. Now there is this new model that is being presented. Some way going back to the statements in the Constitutional Assembly too, of Abrahamic religions versus Indic religions. This is not a way of describing religions. It is being used to other religions. So it's using academic terms, so-called academic terms, but fundamentally to again say, this is Indian, that is not Indian. This belongs, that is. These things have to be thought about very, very deeply. And we also do something. What we colloquially call whataboutism is today a norm. The moment you speak about one anyay happening somewhere, why didn't you speak about that anyay that happened in 1937? Or something else that happened in 1991? This and also the need for everybody to perform. And I have to talk about this. The performance of trying to be correct. That's not honest experience. That is not an honest feeling. My job is to look into my world, the world I occupy, and see how that world can be better. My job is to be an ally to the various people in their various worlds who are also trying to make that world better. My job is not to say my world is always better. Look at that person, it's a worse world. We do that. It is a horrible thing that we do. One is we don't bother about the problems within the world we occupy, whether it is faith or caste or whatever. And there is somebody else from another faith who's trying to make a difference in their world. We don't be an ally. We say, look, even the person of that faith says your faith is horrible. Isn't that the most ugly thing to do? We participate in the violence rather than participate and say allyship to all people who want to make change within their respective worlds. When we speak about fraternity, or the word that comes into our preamble, the two very interesting things. When the preamble was being drafted, there was a huge debate whether God should be included in the preamble or not. It's a very interesting part of our Constitutional Assembly discussions. And in fact, it went to vote. And it was voted against. That we will not have that word in our preamble. And there's actually quite a humorous response from one of the members who says, what would God think if you included God's name in the preamble? And if you have some time, please go read that humorous response from the controversial. He's really humorous. He says, you can't include God's name without checking with God, basically. You know? I mean, how can you decide that God wants to be part of the preamble? It's a humorous response, but it's a very important point, and I want to address this in today's world especially. We also didn't have the word secular. It's a very interesting position. No God, no secular. Now, of course, unnecessary debates have been brought up on whether the inclusion of secular later is something that's forced into our constitution. No. The reason why we didn't have God or secular is because we understood God and secularism very differently. That's the beauty of that decision. We didn't understand God in the sense of being one element that everybody subscribes to in whatever manner. We didn't think of secularism in a simple French sense where you say it's just a division between state and religion. No. Both these words had nuances. God was seen as something that everybody practices and flows freely within people and communities, not kept within dogmas and separate spaces. Secularism also was seen as a practice of coexistence and sharing of faiths, which is why both these ideas are embedded in our fundamental rights. Anybody who reads the fundamental rights of India knows that we are a secular nation. We don't need that word in our preamble to be declared a secular nation. We also know what God or religion means in society through our fundamental rights. So both these ideas were understood with great nuance, great understanding when we created this republic that we call India. And that word fraternity, actually, Ambedkar used a different word. In all his writings, he would use the word Maitri. And I think it's a far more beautiful word than fraternity. Unfortunately, sometimes the limitations of language makes it difficult to find an exact word. Maitri is love, but it's more than love. It's fellowship. And what is even more profound about Maitri, and it relates to the title of this conference, is Maitri is not anthropocentric. Maitri is not just among human beings. Maitri is for all living beings. That's the word we should be seeking. The idea of Maitri. And Ambedkar uses it again and again and again. He says, what we need is Maitri. And that fraternity, again, is different from fraternity in a very Western sense or Western academic sense. There's another person who thought about this idea of fraternity, this idea of Maitri, and probably the first person who ever brought religious cohabitation, religious sharing into what I would call public policy. And that is Ashoka. Just put him in context. 200 years before the Common Era, what were every other kings in the world writing about? How much land I conquered, how much property we have, how much donations I made. Beyond this, most kings had very little to say. Right? And here comes this person who transforms, and then he starts telling people on what kind of society you should have. And he not only tells them, he tells them also what he is doing. A public figure telling them that I have changed. Telling people that I was like this, I was a violent man who is not violent anymore, and I believe we should all change. We should all live together. We should all follow compassion and Dhamma as something that we share in. Now, this is astoundingly beautiful for considering that everybody in the world is not even thinking in this manner at that time. He creates 14 main edicts, there are many minor edicts, and publishes them on rocks and pillars across this land from Afghanistan to Karnataka, what we call Karnataka today, all over the place. And there is one edict that I specifically love, where he talks about harmony. In that edict, Ashoka says something very profound. He says, harmony is the best. Harmony is listening to the reflections of Dhamma. Dhamma is of Dharma, one of those words where you can translate them in so many ways depending on the context and how you want to understand it. So I'll leave it as Dhamma. Harmony is the best. Harmony is the listening to the reflections of Dhamma. And then he goes on to say something more. That's not enough. Harmony is the listening to another's reflections on Dhamma. Not just your reflection on Dhamma, but somebody else's reflections on Dhamma. Even that is not enough. He finally says, harmony is the listening to another's reflection of Dhamma willingly. That is so important. It is not just important that you listen to another person's idea of God or idea of faith. It is important that you listen to it willingly. That willingness to listen is something that is so beautifully encapsulated by Ashoka in his edict. And I think that is what we are trying to do today. Willingly listen to each other. And Ashoka does something else too. He again binds not just Dhamma as in people, he also brings the environment into the conversation. We now have, of course, an act that is the Endangered Species Act in this country. I would think that the first person who thought of the notion of endangered species was Ashoka. Do you know that he lists about 24 animals, birds and reptiles that cannot be killed in his edict? He tells his people that in his kitchen that they limited the consumption of certain species to only killing one or two. Again, it goes to this idea of limitation, which means it is about greed. It is about limiting your greed and avarice. Because most of our problems also is from there. There is greed and avarice even within religion. There is a greed for having that more. That is not really your faith, but the fact is that avarice, the violence that you see is coming from a certain kind of basic greed of capturing things. And that is something also we have to think about. Ashoka does it beautifully even with the environment. He says you can't kill these animals, you can't kill these birds. You have to live in harmony. You have to listen to each other. I don't think I have not found in that era another monarch who has ever done that. And he did one more thing. Have you ever heard of somebody publicly apologizing? And here is a monarch who apologizes in public. Our politicians find it very difficult to do even today. Sorry seems such a difficult word to hear. It is difficult to say. Just apologize is very difficult to do. But I think learning to apologize is one way of listening to other people. Because only when you are able to apologize will you listen. Otherwise you will not listen. And Ashoka does. But let me present Ashoka's conundrum. I don't want to present him as some hagiographical figure that was perfect. Because that is also something we should not do. In the same edict, and in a way I think what happens now is reflective of many of us in this room, I think. So in that edict about Kalinga, which everybody knows, where he says, I went to Kalinga, lakhs of people were killed, lakhs of people were maimed, they lost their limbs. And finally ends in one portion saying, did I really win Kalinga? A very sad and contrite Ashoka asks this reflective question. Did I really win Kalinga after all the violence? But then something happens to Ashoka within the next two lines. Ashoka is bothered by what I would call the forest dwellers. The forest dwellers meaning the Adivasis of this land. Why was he bothered by that? The possible reasons is a lot of resources came from the forest. Elephants, all came from the forest. And they probably felt that their land was being invaded upon. And so he tells the forest dwellers, yes, I have chosen ahimsa, but please remember, I still have arms with me. I still can be violent. And it's important we notice that too. Because in proclamation of ahimsa, we don't become suddenly reformed. This urge to dominate, this urge to say I can still be stronger than you, is something that lies within every one of us. So, subscribing to ahimsa doesn't immediately mean we forget that we can be violent people. Sometimes we use the fact that we have an outward ahimsa to be violent inwardly. When I go back to the word I use, we perform ahimsa as a performance, but the ahimsa is constantly there within us. It is there in the words that we use. It is there in the way we treat our people at home, the way we talk to our friends, the way we talk to people who work for us. These may seem very small compared to large religious questions. They are not. Because if you can't change the words that you use, what word are you going to change? If I don't stop myself when I'm going to use a word I should not use, how am I going to listen to anybody? And this is the almost ethical issue that Ashoka's edict presents in front of us. That he is struggling with this dual personality, if I can use that word. In India, the words religion, culture, spirituality are very difficult to separate. Of course, there are people who say, I am culturally Muslim, I am culturally Hindu, I am culturally Christian. I am not religiously that. There are some people who say, I am spiritual, I am not religious. Right? There are some people who say, I am only religious. Honestly, all three of them don't know what they are talking about. Because it is impossible to separate these words. Because one sees through the other, one lives in the other. So recognizing this almost fluid existence of these words is very, very important. You can't choose to be one. You can't select. You are in a way have to grapple with all of them. You have to live grappling with all of them. If there are issues in all three that you are not able to accept, you have to work with it. You have to grapple with it. You have to struggle with it. Then built on these three words is also the word ritual. I'll come to that a little later. But just these three things. Then you have to ask this question. Let's put the three words in the word religion itself for convenience sake. Why do we have this construct? Why do we need religion at all? Then I'm sure the rationalists are asking that question. What is wrong with all of you? Why do you need this? Why do you need to follow an idea for which you cannot provide me evidence? These are the questions that the rationalists will ask. And I think the rationalists have their fair reasons to ask these questions. But let's forget about the very puerile idea of whether God exists or not. To me, that is an irrelevant question, actually. It is a question that I am not interested in, honestly. I am interested in what we can be because of the practices that we call faith, spirituality, whatever. I think fundamental in that is two things. One is the recognition is that we are limited people. We are limited. We are limited by identities. We are limited by fear. We are limited by anxiety. We are limited by not knowing who we are. We are limited by not understanding how we are centered. And religion hopes to break those limits. To say you can be limitless. There is a possibility that these walls that we have constructed socially around us, we can break. And religion and faiths try to provide you various openings to that limitlessness. That is one. And also the other is hope. If the worst thing has happened to you in your life, the only reason you don't die next year or commit suicide is hope. If we lose hope, we will all be dead. This is a fact. The reason, the struggles of your life, whatever struggles they are, the reason you're able to somehow get up the next morning and move on with life is because there is hope. And religion is an anchor for that hope. That possibility, that there is still abundance over there. There are still things that you can feel, see, taste, smell, experience that gives you the hope that there is a tomorrow. And going back to the sun is rising from the eastern, behind the eastern. Let me speak a little bit about my practice, which is as a singer. I am often asked this question. Actually, if you go to social media, you would constantly see this thing saying, the atheist hail Krishna, the atheist hail Krishna. You'll hear this constantly. It's quite often that you read. I have never declared myself atheist or theist or agnostic. Never. But it's interesting how people presume this identity. I refuse to fall into any of those categories. I don't want to fall into any of the categories. But one other question that I often ask myself, and people have also asked, is why am I doing what I am doing? I could have very easily been a Carnatic singer who is singing for the rest of his life, making money, and quite happy getting applause. It's a very pleasurable life, by the way. There's nothing, it's definitely very pleasurable. And the question is, why am I doing all this? I ask myself, why am I doing all this? And usually these questions are after you do things for whatever reason. Something in you moves you in a direction. And then you want to say, oh God, I'm doing all this, why am I doing this? Then let me try in a very abstract manner to answer that question, because I don't think words can answer the question. The simple answer is music is the reason. Now, does that make sense? Am I saying that because my songs are about gods and goddesses, I'm doing this? Answer is no. I'll continue and say it's music. Because when you are singing, really singing, and I want to emphasize really singing, not that I'm singing for you. In fact, you are immaterial to me. You are irrelevant to me. My audience thinks I'm being rude, but I don't mind. But you are irrelevant when I really sing. When you're really singing, there is something that happens. Now, how does one describe that something? It is those moments. Now, one of the things you're taught as a musician is to be in complete control. You're taught, you know your skill set, I know my music, I know the rag, I know the tal, I know the composition, I know how to improvise. I am supposed to be in entire control of that. And in a way, I'm controlling you, the audience, in the process. Because I know how to get an applause from you. Or just on a lighter way, in South India, applause is not the most important one. This sound is most important. So in a Carnatic audience, if I hear people go, I know I'm doing something magical. Okay? So, but I also know how to get that from you, by the way. I can make you puppets. Do exactly the phrase that I know you're going to do. So then this is what you're taught, by the way. Your training teaches you this control. Something weird started happening to me. This was probably in the late 90s. There were moments where I lost control. I was not in command of everything that was happening. I lost control. Which means something philosophically interesting happens. Is that the moment you are not in control, then in some weird way you are not singing. Does that make sense? Okay. But the most beautiful music happened at that time. Now this is contraindicated with everything I've learned. Because I really thought the best music happens is when I'm in charge. But now I experience something when I'm out of charge is what music happens. This bothered me immensely. This troubled me immensely. Because I didn't know what was going on. Was I singing the most perfect music at that moment? No. Was I pitch perfect at that moment? No. This is also something I have to say. Was I singing perfect sur? No. But the music was something more than being in perfect sur. These are the moments that led me to ask difficult questions of my existence. Because in those moments, for just a brief period, you seem to be a slightly better human being. Those limitations seem to, for a moment at least, break down. You're able to see the world in a manner that you can't see 2 minutes later when you're back doing your own stuff, or you're a horrible person that you are. And my question was simple. Why can't we be slightly better even on other periods of times? Why does it only have to happen in those brief seconds of music? There is a lovely Tamil word. The word signifies saints of the Vaishnava tradition. They call the Alvars. ஆழ்ந்து போறவர்கள் ஆழ்வார். ஆழ்ந்து போறது is going to the depths, To be drowned is actually what it means. To be drowned is to be the Aryas. They were all drowned in bhakti. They were drowned. That drowning is what I'm talking about. I am not going to give any words to it. I don't want to give any words to it. But if you can really drown, then you know what it means to be in peace. You know the possibilities of being a better human being, not in just some abstract sense of in your puja room every morning. No, in your everyday life, in your every action. And that is the only reason you ask difficult questions. And those moments, I want to tell you, are not moments where it's pure in that sense. Actually, those are moments where there's a mirror in front of you. The mirror tells you how horrible you are. Those moments are not pleasurable in that sense, by the way. Don't think it's a pleasurable moment and saying, wow, I'm such a great person. No. Those moments actually tell you how horrible you are as a person. That's why they are important. That's why you have to capture them. It could be for you the sunrise, it could be for you being in prayer, it could be for you being in a mosque, it could be for you being in a temple, it could be anything. It could be for a rationalist working out an equation. I don't care. But it's a possibility of being a better human being and seeing the reality of who you are. And if that is religion, we all need it. If that is God, we need this God. If that's going to change us, we all need it. Call it by what name or reject it, it doesn't matter. It's still doing what it needs to do in a very sensitive, qualitative manner. Yesterday was the 100th birthday of David Attenborough. I don't know how many of you knew. David Attenborough was one of the most important naturalists in the world. And I bumped into accidentally a little video of his, which connects to this subject today. He's him with gorillas. And it's this very beautiful video where there's a mother gorilla there, and he's very carefully, quietly going. And people who know gorillas are often made to be the most violent creatures. You know, the films that we see, King Kong, etc. Right? And then he goes there and he says he was lying down for about 15 minutes. I'm paraphrasing him. And then he says, the mother, female, came and put her hand on his head and turned his head towards her to look into his eyes. And then he says she made some kind of a noise, communication, some noise. And he somehow tried to mimic it. And then he said that was one of the most extraordinary moments of my life. To me, that's the best description of God that he could get. That moment when a gorilla looked at him, into his eyes, made a noise, and he looks back into the gorilla's eyes. There is no fear. There is a moment of communion. There is a moment of conversation. There is a moment of the profound. And that's nature, that's humanity, that's people, all in that one little expression that happens today. And to me, that is so beautiful to even listen to. A few things I'll quickly speak about before I finish is one very important thing that we cannot do is to separate environmentalism or saving the planet from social justice. And I want to say that. Because in this age, we're also having this very, environmentally friendly kind of performance. That's also a performance. I know about a performance better than most of you here, so I can speak confidently where it's a performance and where it's real. You know, this fact that I'm going to save the water, I'm going to save the trees, or I'm going to carry plastic bags, I only buy organic. Whereas you are violent about your religion. You say only Hindus are like this, or only Muslims are like this. Very violent about the fact that only your culture is a culture of saving the planet. No other culture is a culture of saving the planet. Or using the same thing to be violent about your food choices. Saying that you're vegetarian, therefore you're more environmentally friendly than non-vegetarian. We hear that too. We have to address this. You can't be a person working for the environment if you are not thinking of social justice. You can't discuss the sea without talking about the fisherfolk. The fisherfolk are part of the idea of the sea. You can't separate the two. So when we speak of humanity or when we speak of human beings on one side, And environment, first of all, we are the environment. Where are we separate from it? We are one element in it. So if we want the environment to change or environment to be better, we need to work on our various issues as a society. Our social reforms, our caste issues, our religious issues, our ethnic issues, our linguistic issues. You cannot box this into two separate being places and have this conversation. Look at the issue of street dogs, for example. I can't be a social activist and say kill all dogs. Sorry. No. Or I can't be saying I will say dogs care two hoots about adults being killed in this country because they carry beef on their back. No. You have to see the two are exactly the same. It's the same violence that's permeating irrespective of what species we speak about. So this interconnection between how we see human beings and injustice among human beings with injustice in the environment has to go together. You can't save the environment and finish off human beings. You can't do what you want to do in Nicobar, not just because it is about nature, it is also about human beings who live there. This connection has to be made in the way we look at ourselves in changing this world. So transformations have to happen within religions, within communities, and this understanding that you can't separate the two is very, very essential if you want to really move ahead. One final point before I close is, where is the atheist in this conversation? It's a very interesting question to ask. Does the atheist have a right in this conversation? And I'm saying atheist not in terms of atheistic religions, but atheist in the sense of rationalists, in that sense, because I want to differentiate that. And many times, if a person speaks for atheists, that person is also considered an atheist. So it's almost as if a religious person does not have a right to engage in atheistic dialogue, or an atheist person does not have a right to engage in a religious dialogue. I think both these are wrong. I think every human being has a right to engage in every dialogue. Listen to every idea of Dhamma. Atheism is another idea of Dhamma, by the way. We have to respect it as another idea of Dhamma. So how does one create a bridge for that conversation? Not just a conversation of whether God exists or not. That's not the conversation I'm talking about. The conversation of these two things. What does one have to contribute to the other? What does the religious have to contribute to the atheistic world? What does the atheist have to contribute to the religious world? This is also a bridge that needs to be very carefully thought out. Because in that conversation are larger issues that can come in. Listening to a voice from outside sometimes is good for the faithful. Similarly, listening to the faithful's voice is good for the atheist. This bridge is as essential if we want to create a society where various religions, various communities, various people with various thoughts can come together. I forgot to say one thing, because where will we slot Ambedkar in all this? Very interesting question. Yes, we will slot him as a Buddhist at some level. But he was also a rationalist at another level. His famous talk that became a publication, Annihilation of Caste. In that, there is one paragraph that most people don't speak about. So here, at that time, he had not become a Buddhist by then. He was still a harsh critic of Hinduism. And in that, there is one part where he says something very interesting. As much as he was harsh criticizing Hinduism, in that I say he's scathing, absolutely scathing, there's no other word to use. He says, I have heard, I don't know, or I'm paraphrasing, that in your Upanishads, there is a possibility that all these social issues of caste, etc., can be removed if you follow the idea of Upanishads and be transformed as a faith. And I think that's a very important observation to make. Because even though he was scathing, he was still having a conversation with the faithful. He was talking to the people in faith. He was talking to the Christian, he was talking to the Muslim, he was talking to the Hindu. Because in spite of his position, he also believed everybody can change. He also believed that there was openings within the various faiths if they so sought and found them and discovered them and embraced them. So I'll end with that thought, that even a person that today is used in very, very cornered ways was a person of conversation, was a person who listened, person who cared, person who had compassion. And ultimately, irrespective of which faith we belong to, which language we speak, whether we are not faithful in that sense, we have to go back to this fundamental thing. Can we listen to one another? Can there be compassion? And can our moments of beauty expand to a life of beauty? Thank you very much.